Regime change in Iran has been a U.S. objective for decades, and as is typical with all U.S. regime change schemes, America has nurtured a group of exiles to replace the current Iranian government, should they succeed in overthrowing it. While America's chosen regime change exiles for a given country are typically right-wing reactionaries, America's Iranian replacement goes a step further. It's a straight-up cult. They call themselves the Mujahideen Khalq, or the MEK. The MEK is a group of Iranian exiles that's received backing from American Special Operations Forces and Israeli intelligence, and was formerly classified as a terrorist organization by the United States. The MEK has no base of support in Iran. The group is universally reviled by Iranians for a few reasons. But first, a brief history lesson. The MEK started out as a student movement opposed to the Shah, who was installed by the US in a CIA-orchestrated coup in 1953 that ousted Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran's first democratically elected prime minister. Mossadegh's crime was nationalizing Iran's oil because, how dare Iranians benefit from their own resources? After the 1979 revolution that overthrew the Shah, the MEK clashed with the new clerical regime and was soon exiled from Iran. The MEK took shelter in Iraq, where they allied with Saddam Hussein against Iran during the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. That's one major reason why Iranians dislike the group. Another reason is that the MEK carried out a series of bombings and assassinations in Iran in the 1980s. And more recently, the MEK participated with Israeli intelligence to murder Iranian scientists. So yeah, Iranians aren't exactly MEK fans. But what makes the MEK even less appealing to Iranians is that in the 1980s, it began to transform into a cult, built around its leader, Masoud Rajavi, and his wife, Maryam Rajavi.
And this is in part because they were no longer able to get new, fresh recruits from Iran, because the decision to join with Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq War, in which he was the aggressor, pretty much ended any legitimacy that the MEK had among the Iranian people.
This cult, based in the Iraqi desert and totally centered around the creepy Rajavi couple, engaged in all kinds of abuses. The Rajavis forced their members to divorce their spouses so they could better commit themselves to the organization, imposed mandatory celibacy, and separated children from their parents by shipping their kids off to Western countries. Single people were forced to cut anyone from their lives that they had feelings of love for. Anyone suspected of disagreeing with the Rajavis or who tried to leave the group were tortured, imprisoned, and disappeared. That's according to ex-members who managed to escape.
شکنجه افراد بودم، شاهد کشته شدن افراد بودم و خودم شکنجه شدم، خودم مورد تحقیر و توهین قرار گرفتم. کسی که از خودش بود 30 سال توش خدمت کرد که ماها باشیم چه کار کرد بعد فردا به ایرانم میرسیم.
After the US invaded Iraq, the MEK was isolated to an Iraqi compound called Camp Ashraf under American protection, where the abuse of their members continued. More than 70% of the MEK members in Camp Ashraf were said to be held there against their will, while others were apparently tricked into going and subjected to mind control exercises. Meanwhile, back in the US, the MEK was being used as a tool against the Iranian government. In 2005, the US Joint Special Operations Command trained MEK operatives at a secret site in Nevada in communications, cryptography, weaponry, and small unit tactics. It's believed that this is where they learned to build the bombs that were used to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists.
The MEK has been in a virtual war with the mullahs in Iran since the fall of the Shah, and you don't have to urge them to kill anybody. They're very eager to do it themselves inside that country. But still, nonetheless, we provide intelligence. We, the Americans, have continued to provide intelligence and other kinds of material support for the MEK.
In 2013, the MEK was evacuated from Iraq and resettled in Albania, where the Americans continued to support them. What's strange is how the US supported the group throughout its inclusion on the State Department's list of foreign terrorist groups, starting in 1997 for its role in the murder of 6 US citizens in the 1970s. Obama's State Department under Hillary Clinton removed them from the terrorist list in 2012, following intense lobbying. This allowed the MEK to use its massive foreign-financed war chest to try to crush all other Iranian voices in the United States and establish itself as the democratic alternative to the Iranian government in the eyes of corrupt and naive US officials. And boy, did it work.
You've got people like George W. Bush, was given $1,000 in 2004.
So I see here John McCain. So is this Republicans, Democrats?
It's both. I mean, it goes across the aisle. So, McCain got $2,400, $1,000. But then, Obama's on here too.
No one's really sure where the MEK gets its money from, but it's believed that it receives significant funding from Saudi Arabia. In 2016 and 2017, Saudi Arabia's former intelligence chief, Prince Turki Al Faisal, gave a speech at the MEK's annual Paris rally, raising even more suspicions that the Saudis are backing the group. The MEK has such little organic support that at its annual gathering in Paris, they had to pay people to attend. Among the crowd of about 4,000 that showed up, The Guardian reported that around half of the attendees were an assortment of bored-looking Poles, Czechs, Slovakians, Germans, and Syrians who responded to a Facebook campaign promising travel, food, and accommodation to Paris. And many snoozed under trees during speeches. The group's deep pockets help explain the support and yearly speeches at MEK rallies by easily bought and paid for American politicians and luminaries of the foreign policy establishment on both ends of the political spectrum.
You've been able to form resistance units all over Iran. Those protests are not happening accidentally. They're being coordinated by many of our people in Albania and many of our people here and all throughout the world.
The stars seem to be aligned to accomplish what we all want to accomplish, which is the downfall of the mullah's regime.
Are you ready for Madame Rajavi as president of Iran?
Even Howard Dean, former governor of Vermont and an original anti-Iraq war critic, is on the MEK payroll and defends them passionately.
It's not a terrorist group, first of all.
Aren't they responsible for car bombings in Iran?
30 years ago, they were responsible for some terrorist acts.
Actually, the MEK has continued to engage in plotting attacks against Iran, which is precisely why the Americans like the group, especially as U.S. policy under Trump becomes even more hawkish against Iran. On the 65th anniversary of the 1953 U.S.-backed coup, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the formation of an Iran Action Group to execute the Trump administration's cruel policy of collective punishment against Iranians through crippling economic sanctions.
For nearly 40 years, the regime in Tehran has been responsible for a torrent of violent and destabilizing behavior against the United States, our allies, our partners, and indeed the Iranian people themselves.
Why does that all sound so familiar?
Saddam Hussein remains an impediment to the well-being of his people and a threat to the peace of his region and the security of the world.
There is a viable opposition to the rule of the Ayatollahs, and that opposition is centered in this room today.
Strengthening our political support to make sure the opposition, or to do what we can to make the opposition a more effective voice.
The BBG is launching a new 24/7 Farsi language TV channel,
beginning broadcasts of a Radio Free Iraq throughout the country.
Friendship with the Iranian people.
Aspirations of the Iraqi people.
It seems the past is always present. It's the same regime change script over and over again.
The more unstable we can help Iran to become, the better it is to actually secure peace if we can get rid of that theological regime one day.
When pundits talk about a regime, they think they can separate it from the people. But the regime is a government with employees. It's a government that organizes traffic lights and traffic laws, and electricity for hospitals and people's homes, and water for them to drink, and police to prevent people from eating each other, and an economy so they know that their money has value, and immunization so their kids don't get polio.
Melt the system just for fun. Hey, it's not a system. It's a country. You're talking about people, all right? A whole country full of people.
It's the same exact thing that was done in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, supporting a reactionary group of unpopular exiles as a tool to help collapse the state. And it worked out terribly in each case, creating refugee crises that ultimately empowered the far right in Europe. Iran is the most stable country in the Middle East, and it's a massive country with a population of 80 million. Destabilizing Iran will only lead to more chaos and destruction, and ultimately even more refugees flooding into an increasingly hostile and right-wing Europe. The far right will gain, and the Middle East will be down another country, brought to you by the same people who brought freedom to Iraq. This is the same freedom they want to bring to the Iranian people. How many more countries in the Middle East have to be destroyed before the regime changers are satisfied?